I knew something was wrong the moment I opened my eyes and saw the ceiling. It wasn't mine. Mine had a faint crack shaped like a crooked branch. This one was smooth, white, too bright, and the air, cold, sterile, hit me like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I tried to lift my hand, and it trembled as if it didn't belong to me. A monitor beeped somewhere close by. I thought, with terrifying clarity, I'm in a hospital. Why? A nurse in blue scrubs leaned over me, her face soft, professional. Mrs. Eldridge? Can you hear me? I nodded, though my neck felt stiff. You were brought in last night, she said. Loss of consciousness, severe reaction to a sedative mixture. I stared at her, trying to gather the pieces of memory that slipped like soap from wet fingers. Last night? Yes. I remembered the kitchen light, warm and dim, the faint scent of lavender from the candle I'd lit, and Clara, my daughter-in-law, standing by the stove with that polite, tight smile she always wore around me. She'd said, "Mom, you barely sleep these days. Drink this before bed, it'll help." She put the mug in my hands like she was offering comfort, not obligation. I remember the taste, bitter under the honey, a bitterness I didn't question because I was tired, and it was easier to trust than to doubt. Then darkness. Nothing else. The nurse adjusted something near the IV stand. Your labs showed several substances. Some shouldn't be mixed. The doctor will explain. Her tone was careful, like stepping around broken glass. I wanted to tell her this was surely a misunderstanding, that Clara may be impatient, yes, and sharp-tongued when she thinks I don't hear, but she is no monster. She's the mother of my granddaughter, the woman my son loves. And I've lived long enough to know people hurt others more often through carelessness than cruelty. I clung to that thought like a rope thrown into deep water. If you enjoy the stories here, dear, you're welcome to join our Patreon. There you'll find exclusive tales that never appear on YouTube, and new stories come out earlier than anywhere else. The link is just below. We're waiting for you. The doctor arrived, calm, middle-aged, with the heavy eyes of a man who delivers hard truths as gently as he can. He asked a few questions: what I took before bed, who gave it to me, whether I had mixed medications myself. I answered honestly, my voice thin, as if someone had scraped it clean inside me. When I said Clara's name, something flickered across his face. Not surprise. Recognition. Mrs. Eldridge, he said, folding his hands. The interaction of these substances could have been fatal. Hospital protocol requires us to notify authorities when there's a possibility of intentional or negligent poisoning. I felt the words settle on my chest like wet earth. Authorities. Poisoning. Clara. I shook my head. She didn't mean, but the room didn't bend to my hesitation. Try to rest, he said gently. You're stable now, but the police will ask for a statement. When he left, the silence in the room felt heavier than the truth. My mind tried to reach for excuses, to build small bridges of explanation the way I had done for years. Clara must have been stressed. She misread the label. Maybe she thought it was harmless, just something herbal. She couldn't have known. She simply couldn't. A soft knock sounded, and I turned my head slowly. It was my son, David. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes rimmed red as if he hadn't slept. He stepped inside quietly, as though entering a church. For a long moment he just looked at me, and in his gaze I saw not understanding, not yet, but fear. The kind that comes when the life you built begins to tilt, and you're not sure which way it will fall. "Mom?" he whispered. "What happened?" I opened my mouth, but the truth jammed in my throat like a secret too heavy to lift. And all I could think was, if I speak, something in our family will break forever. And if I stay silent, something in me already has. I closed my eyes, feeling the sting behind them. The machines kept beeping softly, like patient witnesses. The room smelled of disinfectant and endings. When I finally whispered his wife's name, it sounded like someone else's voice entirely. I didn't sleep at all that night, though the nurse dimmed the lights and whispered that I should try. My body was exhausted, but my mind kept circling the same thought. What if this wasn't an accident? Every time that idea appeared, I pushed it away like a rude guest knocking at the door. I told myself I was tired, confused, still recovering. But it kept knocking, patient and insistent. By morning, the hallway noises grew louder, carts rolling, conversations drifting, the soft squeak of rubber soles. A different nurse checked my vitals. She looked at me too carefully, as if measuring more than my blood pressure. Then she murmured, "The detective will be here soon," and left the room without waiting for my reaction. Detective? The word cut deeper than any diagnosis. I wanted to call David, but my hands shook too badly. I wanted to call Clara, too, if only to hear her voice, to study it closely, to see if it still matched the woman I'd tried so long to love. But I didn't. I wasn't ready for her explanations, whatever they would be, tearful, indignant, or rehearsed. When the door finally opened, the detective didn't look like the men from television. No hard jaw, no dark coat, no intimidating silence. He was a man in his 50s, slightly stooped, with kind eyes and a notebook already open. His name was Officer Hale. He introduced himself softly, like a pastor entering a grieving home. "Mrs. Eldridge, I know this is difficult. We only want to understand what happened." I nodded. My throat felt tight. "Can you tell me," he began, "what you took last night?" So I told him. My voice was thin, but every word was deliberate. I described the mug, the smell, the way Clara handed it to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I explained that I'd been struggling with sleep, that she'd noticed, that she'd said she had something stronger than herbal tea. I didn't say anything unkind. Habit, I suppose. A lifetime of softening edges. "Did she tell you what was in it?" he asked. "No." "Have you taken sedatives on your own?" "Yes. Mild ones, but never mixed anything." "I'm careful." I hesitated, wiping my palm against the blanket. "I was a nurse for 30 years. I know what mixing medications can do." He wrote that down, slowly, as if giving me time. "Do you believe your daughter-in-law intended harm, Mrs. Eldridge?" I felt my breath catch. He'd asked it gently, but it felt like a blow. "How can I believe that?" I whispered. "She's family." He waited, patient. He didn't push. That somehow made it harder. "I think I don't know. Maybe she didn't understand how strong it was. Maybe she didn't read the label. Maybe she was trying to help and something went wrong." He looked at me with eyes that had seen too many stories like this. Sometimes people mean well. Sometimes they don't. It's our job to determine which. He closed his notebook with a soft click. "Your toxicology results show 3 substances. 1 prescribed, 2 not. One of them in a concentration that—" He paused, choosing his words with painful care. "It couldn't have been an accident." My heart seemed to stop, then start again with a painful thud. "You're saying she—" "I'm saying the amounts were deliberate," he replied. "Someone measured them." Measured, not guessed, not mistaken. I pressed my hand to my mouth. Even then, even as logic formed a neat, cold line in my mind, my heart resisted. Because if I believed him, I had to accept something far worse than poisoning. I had to accept that the little dismissive gestures, the sighs, the cold politeness from Clara over the years were not just personality. They were distance, and distance, left long enough, becomes something sharp. Officer Hale stood. "We'll need a formal statement later today. For now, rest, Mrs. Eldridge." Rest. The word felt almost cruel. After he left, I closed my eyes, but the darkness behind them was no refuge. I kept seeing Clara's hands, the way she set the mug down, the slight tremble in her fingers, the way she avoided looking directly at me. I had dismissed it then. I dismissed so much. By the time David returned mid-morning, I had rehearsed a dozen ways to tell him, each ending in his hurt, his confusion, his disbelief. But he surprised me. He sat beside the bed, held my hand carefully, and whispered. The detective spoke to me. I swallowed. "And?" David's voice cracked, though he tried to steady it. "Mom, did Clara give you that drink?" His eyes searched mine, not accusing, pleading, wanting truth but terrified of it. "She did," I said softly, "but I don't want to jump to conclusions." David closed his eyes as if bracing himself. "Mom, they found pills in our bathroom cabinet that weren't prescribed to either of us." I felt something inside me go still. Not break, no. That had happened earlier. This was something colder, a settling, a knowing. "I didn't want to believe it," he whispered, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "But I think something has been wrong for a long time." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I simply squeezed his hand. And for the first time since waking in that hospital bed, I allowed myself to think the thought I had been running from. Maybe this wasn't a mistake at all. Detective Hale returned in the afternoon, though he'd warned me it would happen. Between his visits, the nurses moved quietly around me, and David stepped out often to take calls, his voice muffled in the hallway, low and tense. I didn't ask what he was discussing. A mother knows when a son is holding something in, even if she no longer has the strength to pull it out of him. When the detective came in, he didn't sit right away. He studied the room, then me, as if gauging not just my words, but my ability to survive the ones he was about to ask for. "Mrs. Eldridge," he said gently, "I'd like to go over a timeline of events. Just take your time." I nodded, folding my hands on my lap. They looked thin in the morning light, like the hands of someone else, a woman who slipped away without protest. I wasn't sure when I'd become that woman. He began with simple questions. What time I'd last eaten. When Clara arrived. What she said. How she moved. The tilt of her voice. Whether the mug had already been prepared or if she'd mixed it in front of me. He wrote everything down. But at some point, his questions shifted. They moved from the night itself into the years before it, softly but unmistakably. "Has your daughter-in-law ever given you medications before?" "Yes." "And did she usually explain what they were?" "No," I whispered, but I didn't ask. A faint nod. "And has she ever pressured you to take anything you weren't comfortable with?" That question sat between us for a long time. I stared at the blanket, tracing the weave with my eyes. Pressured. Such a small word for so many moments. "Yes," I finally said, "now and then." But I told myself she was only trying to help. He didn't comment, just wrote. "Has Clara ever handled your personal documents? Banking, medical, legal?" Another pause. "Sometimes," I said, "when David was busy." "Do you recall which documents?" No. I trusted her. The truth wasn't the problem. My voice was. It trembled, and I hated that. I'd spent my life holding other people steady. Patience, my husband, my son. Yet here I was, shaking over memories I'd dismissed for years as trivial. Then he asked the question I had dreaded since dawn. "Mrs. Eldridge, Before last night, did you ever feel unsafe around her? I inhaled sharply. Not because the answer surprised me, but because the answer was so simple. No, I said firmly. But after a moment, I added, though I suppose I often felt small. He lifted his eyes at that, not frightened, not threatened, just small, invisible in my own home, where my mug was moved to a different shelf, my blanket folded a different way, my chair taken by her handbags, her laptop, her presence. Detective Hale closed the notebook. Sometimes harm doesn't begin with fear, Mrs. Eldridge. It begins with erasing someone inch by inch. The words struck deeper than I wanted to admit. I looked away, blinking hard. There was a knock, and a nurse peeked in. Everything all right? Yes, I said quickly. She nodded and left. Hale stood. We'll take your formal statement tomorrow morning. For now, I suggest you speak with your son. He cares for you deeply. I wanted to believe that, without hesitation. I truly did. After he left, David stepped inside as if waiting for permission. He sat by my bed again, and for a while, neither of us spoke. He looked older than he had yesterday. Older, and somehow smaller too. Mom, he said at last, they found something else. I felt the air shift. What is it, David? He rubbed his temple. In the kitchen drawer. There were empty blister packs, not mine, not yours. And Clara's? He swallowed. They're medications she never told me she had. Strong ones. I looked at him, studying his face the way mothers do, reading beyond the words. You think she meant to harm me? He opened his mouth, closed it, then whispered. I don't know what to think. I don't know who she is anymore. A strange ache went through me. Not because of the suspicion, not even because of the danger I'd been in, but because my son now stood at the edge of something he could no longer ignore. I had lived there for years. I knew that lonely place. David, I said softly, I don't want to tear your family apart. He shook his head, eyes wet. Something was already breaking, Mom. I just didn't see it. The room felt smaller then, as if the past years pressed into the corners and walls, whispering all the things I'd chosen not to disturb. For my son's sake. For the illusion of peace. A nurse came to check my blood pressure. David stepped aside, grateful for the interruption. When she left, he remained standing, staring at the floor. I need to talk to Clara, he murmured. Be careful, I said quietly. He looked up, startled. Perhaps it was the first time he'd ever heard me speak those words about his wife, without excuses or softness. I'll be back soon, he promised. And then he left the room, though part of me feared he was walking into a truth neither of us was ready to fully face. I sat very still, listening to the hallway sounds until they blurred together, the machines humming beside me like old companions. For the first time since waking in this hospital bed, I wasn't afraid of the questions ahead. I was afraid of the answers. I didn't expect David to return quickly, but the hours stretched much longer than they should have. Afternoon light crawled up the wall like a slow confession, and every few minutes I caught myself listening for his footsteps. The nurses came and went. They spoke kindly, but I could feel something unspoken in their tone, the way people soften their voices around someone who has just learned an unpleasant truth. By the time David finally stepped into the room, the sun had dipped low enough to turn the windows gold. I knew before he opened his mouth that he had spoken to her. There was a heaviness in the way he closed the door behind him, a carefulness in his movements, as if he were afraid any sudden sound might crack whatever was left standing inside him. He sat, but he didn't look at me. Not right away. Instead, he rubbed his palms together slowly, the way he used to do before school exams when he was a nervous boy. I felt an ache rise in my chest at the memory of that version of him, the one who was so easy to comfort, so easy to protect. "Mom," he said at last, "I talked to Clara." His voice had changed. Not broken, no. Something quieter, thinner, stripped of certainty. "What did she say?" He breathed out, leaning back in the chair. "She said it was a mistake. She said she mixed up the bottles. She claims she only wanted to help you sleep." "And do you believe her?" That question sat between us like a heavy object neither of us wanted to touch. David ran a hand over his face. "I don't know." And then, more quietly, "I want to. God, I want to." I nodded. I understood. Wanting to believe someone you love. That was a kind of loyalty women of my generation had been trained to treat as virtue. Yet loyalty can blind more effectively than any poison. "She said the pills weren't hers," he continued. "That maybe you misunderstood the dosage. That maybe you mixed something without realizing." He stopped when he noticed the look on my face. Sharp, despite my trembling. "I spent 30 years in medicine, David," I said softly. "I know what I take, and I know what I don't." He nodded with a short, painful dip of the head. I told her that, but she just kept insisting, and then she started crying. The corner of his mouth twitched, half pity, half bitterness. "You know how she cries, like the world has wronged her personally." Yes, I knew that tone. I had heard it in the kitchen when she thought I wasn't doing something the modern way. I had heard it when she rearranged my cupboards without asking, calling it helping me stay organized. I had heard it when she told David we needed boundaries. That was the year my visits dropped from weekly to monthly, then to occasional holidays, if it suited her mood. "What happened then?" I asked. David's jaw tightened. "She got angry, really angry. Said the police questioning her was humiliating. Said it was unfair that she had to prove innocence for an accident. She said—" He hesitated. "Say it," I whispered. "She said you're confused, that you exaggerate, that you're fragile." The word felt like a slap, though David hadn't meant it that way. Fragile. The convenient label for any older woman who refuses to collapse quietly into the corner, prepared for her. "I see," I murmured. David leaned forward suddenly, elbows on his knees. "Mom, please tell me the truth. Not the softened version. Not what you think will protect us, just the truth. Do you think she could have done this intentionally?" My heart pressed hard against my ribs. I looked at my son. Really looked. And saw in his eyes not just fear, but something rawer. Betrayal. The kind that tears through the careful arrangements of a life and leaves sharp edges lying everywhere. "I think," I said slowly, "that people don't wake up one morning and decide to harm someone they respect." He lifted his eyes to mine, and I watched the meaning settle into him, heavy and undeniable. "She hasn't respected me for a long time," I continued. "We both know that. You've seen it, even if you didn't want to admit it." David dropped his gaze again. "I'm sorry, Mom." "Don't apologize," I said gently. "Seeing clearly is painful work." He let out a shaky breath. "The police want to question her again tomorrow, separately. They said the toxicology report leaves no room for accidents." "I know." He looked up. "Are you afraid?" I thought about the question. Really thought. The pain, the betrayal, the hospital, the cold edges of truth pressing in. None of it frightened me as much as one simple reality. "I'm afraid," I whispered, "that once this is over, nothing in our family will ever be the same." David reached for my hand. His grip was warm but unsteady. Maybe it shouldn't be the same. His words surprised me, not because they were harsh, but because they carried a quiet courage I hadn't seen in him for years. For a moment, we simply sat there, hands clasped, the evening light dimming around us. Somewhere outside the room, a machine beeped, steady and indifferent, as if marking time for both of us. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm going home to check on Lily. I'll be back tomorrow morning." "All right." He kissed my forehead, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager, and walked to the door with slow, heavy steps. When he left, I closed my eyes and listened to the silence he left behind. And for the first time, I understood. The truth wasn't breaking our family. It was revealing what had been broken for a long, long time. They discharged me the next morning. David wanted to drive me home, but he had to take Lily to school, and I insisted I could manage a taxi. Part of me wanted a moment alone, a quiet pocket of time before I stepped back into the house that no longer felt like mine. The cab pulled up to the curb, and I sat for a moment, staring at my front door. Funny how a place can look exactly the same and yet feel like a stranger. The geraniums on the porch were still blooming, though someone had overwatered them. The doormat was crooked. I always kept it straight. Small details, maybe, but they all whispered the same unsettling truth. Someone had been living in my absence the way they preferred, not the way I had left it. Inside, the air felt different too, colder, as if the house had been holding its breath. My slippers were moved to a different corner. The blanket draped over the couch wasn't folded in my usual way. And on the kitchen counter, next to the fruit bowl, lay a stack of my mail, opened. The sight made something tighten deep inside my ribs. Clara had a habit of tidying what wasn't hers to touch. She called it helping. David called it her way of showing she cares. I had called it nothing at all, because calling it out would have made me look ungrateful. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching the backs of chairs, the edge of the table, grounding myself. When I reached the bedroom, I noticed the nightstand drawer slightly ajar. I never leave it that way. Inside were my medications. The bottles rearranged. One was missing. I stood very still, my hand on the drawer, listening to the quiet hum of the house as if it might offer an explanation. Instead, memories surfaced. Unwelcome, sharp. The time Clara insisted the dose on my heart pills was too strong and moved them to a different shelf. The time she took my insurance papers to put them somewhere safer. The time she told David I was forgetting things, when in truth she simply didn't like being contradicted. I closed the drawer gently. Too gently, perhaps, for what churned inside me. In the kitchen I made tea, though my hands trembled enough that I spilled some water on the counter. The scent of chamomile rose softly, familiar and warm, but I could no longer drink anything without hesitation. I stared at the mug for a long moment before taking the first sip, as if trust itself had become something that required effort. The front door creaked. I turned sharply. It was Lily, my granddaughter, her school bag still on her shoulder, her eyes wide with worry. She rushed to me with a kind of relief children no longer bother hiding once they become adults. "Grandma," she breathed, hugging me tight. "Dad said you were home. I told him I had to see you." I held her close, grateful for her warmth. She smelled like pencil shavings and wintergreen gum, the scent of someone who still lives honestly. "Are you feeling better?" she asked, stepping back to study my face. "I'm all right," I said. "Just tired." Her gaze flicked to my teacup, then back to me. Grandma, I heard them arguing last night. She hesitated, lowering her voice. Dad and Mom? He was asking her why she didn't call the ambulance right away. She kept saying she didn't realize it was that serious. But her voice didn't sound sorry. A thin chill moved through me. What exactly did she say? I asked. Lily bit her lip. She said she thought you'd exaggerated the dizziness before, that maybe you'd imagined it again. Dad got angry. Really angry. He said she was twisting things. She paused. I've never heard him talk to her like that. I set my mug down. Thank you for telling me, sweetheart. She nodded, her eyes glistening. Grandma, I don't believe what she's saying. I know you. I've always known. Her quiet certainty steadied something inside me, something long neglected. Go back to school, I told her gently. Your dad needs you to be calm right now. She hugged me again before leaving, and when the door closed behind her, the house fell silent. I walked to the window and stood there a long while, looking out at the street I had lived on for more than 40 years. People went about their ordinary lives, unaware of the quiet unraveling happening behind my curtains. Home, I realized, is not just walls and furniture. It is safety. And for the first time in my life, this house no longer felt safe. And that, more than anything else, was what finally made me angry. Lily's footsteps had barely faded down the walkway when a heaviness settled over the house, as if her presence had been holding the walls upright. I stood for a while in the quiet kitchen, listening to the drip of the faucet, noticing how the air seemed different, tense, watchful. It was strange how a home could turn into a place of suspicion overnight. Stranger still was how familiar that suspicion felt, as though it had been waiting for years, only now stepping forward into the light. I decided to check the rest of the house, not because I expected to find anything dramatic, but because I needed to reassure myself that whatever had been moved, taken, tampered with, I would see it with clear eyes this time. No more smoothing over discomfort the way I used to smooth wrinkles in a tablecloth. In the hallway closet, my coats were pushed aside to make room for Clara's jackets, all lined up neatly, expensive fabrics brushing against my old wool one. I touched the sleeve of one, surprised by how little it meant to me now. Once, I would have tried to make sense of it. Oh, she probably didn't realize she was crowding my things. But today, I saw it for what it was, a quiet claiming of space that wasn't hers. In the guest room, the room David used to sleep in as a boy, a suitcase stood open on the chair. Clara's, clothes still inside. I stared at it, something cold unfurling inside me. Had she planned to stay here while I was in the hospital, or had she stayed last night after the police questioning? I didn't know which answer unsettled me more. When I returned to the living room, I noticed Lily's favorite sweatshirt folded on the armchair. She must have left it here last week. I picked it up, pressing the soft fabric to my chest, and for a moment the room didn't feel so hostile. The doorbell rang. I froze. For a second I thought it was David, but then I heard a hurried knock, the kind that carries more entitlement than worry. I opened the door only a crack. It was Clara. Her hair was pulled back sharply, her coat unbuttoned, her face arranged into an expression I'd come to recognize over the years. Helplessness stretched over irritation. She pushed the door wider and stepped inside before I could invite her. She moved quickly, like someone late for an appointment she never planned to keep. Thank God you're home, she said breathlessly. David told me you were discharged, and I thought, well, I'd better come check on you. I looked at her for a long moment. She avoided my eyes. I'm fine, I said quietly. She nodded too quickly. Good, good. I was worried. The whole hospital ordeal was terrifying, you know. I told the detective you must have mixed something accidentally. You've been so overwhelmed lately, and— Stop, I said gently. She blinked, startled. I had never interrupted her before, not once. I stepped farther into the room, giving her space but not permission to follow. Her eyes scanned the living room, at the mail, at the mug on the table, the way someone surveys damage after a storm. I know you're upset, she said, softening her voice. But you have to believe me, Martha. I didn't mean for anything bad to happen. I gave you something mild, just something to help you sleep. You misunderstood the strength. Anyone could have made that mistake. I didn't misunderstand anything, I said. A flicker, irritation, then calculation, crossed her face before she smoothed it away. You're confused. The doctor said older adults. That's enough, I said, more firmly this time. The silence that followed stretched long and thin between us. I saw then what I had refused to see for years, the absence of warmth in her expression, the faint contempt hiding behind her politeness, the way she straightened her shoulders as if preparing for a role she no longer believed in. You opened my mail, I said quietly. You moved my medications. One bottle is missing. Her lips parted, then closed. Not denial, not immediately, but surprise that I had finally noticed. I was just trying to help, she said sharply. Someone has to keep things organized here. You don't always remember. I took a slow breath. I remember more than you think. Her eyes narrowed. If you're implying something— I'm not implying, I said. I'm telling you, from now on, you don't touch anything in this house. You don't enter without permission. And you don't give me anything. Not food, not tea, not pills. The silence thickened, heavy as a winter quilt. Clara's face hardened. David will never take your side. I met her gaze steadily. He already has. That rattled her. I saw it. The tiny shift in her posture, the faint tremor at the corner of her mouth. She turned away, reached for her coat, then stopped. You don't know what you're doing, she said in a cold whisper. You're ruining everything. No, I said softly. I'm finally protecting myself. She left without another word, the door slamming hard enough to make the picture frames tremble on the wall. I stood alone in the quiet house, feeling the echo of that slam settle into the floorboards. For the first time, the silence didn't frighten me. It steadied me. It told me I wasn't imagining any of it. And it told me the days of shrinking myself to keep the peace were finally over. By evening, the house felt calmer, though not because anything had truly settled. It was the calm that follows a storm, the kind that allows you to walk through rooms and finally see the damage for what it is. I sat on the sofa with a blanket over my knees, my tea untouched, and listened to the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Every sound in the house had a sharper edge now, as if the walls themselves were insisting I stay awake, stay alert. When the phone rang, I recognized Detective Hale's number. Mrs. Eldridge, he said, I wanted to inform you we've moved to the next stage of the investigation. We'll need access to certain documents, medical and financial, to rule out forged prescriptions or unauthorized purchases. My fingers tightened around the phone. What documents exactly? Any medication logs, prescription receipts, banking statements related to pharmacy transactions, and, if you consent, a review of any power of attorney agreements. Power of attorney. Those 3 words landed with a weight I hadn't expected. There was one. A limited one David and I signed years ago, after my surgery, allowing him to handle urgent paperwork if I were hospitalized. He never abused it. He barely remembered it existed. But I remembered handing the folder to him afterward and watching Clara take it from his hands to file properly. "Detective," I said slowly, "I'll gather what I can, but I won't give access to certain documents without first speaking to my lawyer." "That's entirely within your rights," he replied. And then, more gently, "You're doing the right thing." The right thing. Strange how it could feel both empowering and terrifying. After the call, I sat in silence, my thoughts moving like slow tides. I had always believed asserting oneself was a loud act. Raised voices, slammed doors, ultimatums. Yet here I was, asserting myself simply by choosing caution over blind trust. And it shook me more than any confrontation. I went to the hall closet and pulled down the metal file box where I kept my folders. Medical papers, bank statements, insurance records. Dust coated the lid. I brushed it away with the back of my hand and carried the box to the dining table. The first folder I opened was old, brittle from being handled too many times. Bank statements lay neatly inside, except for one gap. A month missing. I frowned. I rarely misfiled anything. I checked the back. Nothing. A small tremor ran through me. Had Clara taken it? Or had I simply forgotten? No, I would not start doubting myself now. The next folder held pharmacy receipts. Several recent ones were paper-clipped together. But again, one was missing. I remembered it clearly. The last bottle of sleeping tablets I purchased. I specifically remembered because Clara had commented, "You shouldn't be taking those, Martha. Doctors these days overprescribe to older patients." I sat back in the chair, letting the pattern form. Missing documents, moved medications, anxiety disguised as assistance, control disguised as care. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. Instead, I felt something subtle shift inside me. The quiet reclaiming of a voice that had been ignored for too long. The doorbell startled me. I tensed before forcing myself to breathe. It was David. He stepped in and closed the door behind him with uncharacteristic gentleness. "Mom," he said, taking off his jacket, "you shouldn't be alone right now." I almost smiled. "I've been alone for years, David. Tonight isn't any different." He winced, as if the truth had cut deeper than he expected. Then he noticed the open folders on the table. "You're organizing things?" "Preparing," I said. "The detective needs copies." David pulled out a chair and sat. He didn't touch the papers immediately. He just watched me, his eyes tired but clearer than they'd been in a long time. "Mom? Did you know Clara tried to tell the detective you might have confused your medications because of your age?" He said it carefully, as if hoping I would say it didn't bother me. But it did. It bothered me deeply. "I'm old," I replied calmly. "I'm not incompetent." He nodded, swallowing hard. I told him the same. For a long moment, we sat together in a silence that didn't ache like before. It felt collaborative. As if for the first time in years, we were looking in the same direction. "David," I said quietly, "I'm not giving full access to anything until my lawyer advises me." He looked surprised, not at the words, but at the steel behind them. "Good," he said. "I think that's smart." He reached for one of the folders, then paused. "Mom, if something is missing, we'll find out. I promise." But I already knew some things had been missing long before today. Like my boundaries. Like my place in my own home. Like my belief that silence keeps families intact. I closed the file box and rested my hand on top of it, steady and sure. Whatever came next, I would face it with my eyes open. I heard the knock long before it reached the door. Sharp, clipped, full of impatience. It wasn't David. It wasn't Lily. I knew exactly who it was, and for a moment I simply stood in the hallway, breathing slowly, letting my heart settle into something steady. I had promised myself I wouldn't shrink anymore, not in my own house. When I finally opened the door, Clara pushed inside without waiting for an invitation. She moved past me with the confidence of someone who believed the space belonged to her more than to me. "Martha, we need to talk." Her voice was tight, trembling, not with fear, but anger. "David says you've been telling the detective I gave you something dangerous. That's ridiculous." "I told him the truth," I said quietly. She spun toward me, eyes sharp. "Your truth," she snapped, "which is distorted lately. You forget things. You misinterpret things. You take comments personally and twist them." Ah, there it was. The script she had prepared. The one she had rehearsed so long, it came out smooth as silk. "I forget nothing," I replied. She let out a short, bitter laugh. "You forgot where your savings book was last month." "Yes," I said. "Because you moved it." Her face paled, then flushed dark. She hadn't expected me to answer directly. "I was helping," she insisted, lifting her chin. "You leave things everywhere. You're not as organized as you used to be." "I didn't ask for help." Something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt, but irritation. The kind a person feels when a mirror is held up unexpectedly. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "David is confused right now. The police scared him. But when all this settles, he'll realize you're overreacting. He always does." I felt a strange calm settle over me, like a warm blanket laid gently across my shoulders. "No," I said. "He won't." She blinked. Her smile thinned. "You think you've suddenly turned him against me?" "I didn't turn him," I answered. "You did." She opened her mouth to argue, but I continued, my voice steady. "You rearranged my medications. You opened my mail. You insisted on handling my insurance forms, and when I ended up unconscious, you didn't call the ambulance right away." I paused. "Lily heard you argue with David. She heard what you told him." A crack formed in her expression, the first honest one I had seen in years. "Oh, so now a teenager is a reliable witness?" she scoffed, but her voice shook. "More reliable than someone who keeps lying," I said. She took a slow breath, then exhaled through clenched teeth. "If you think the police are going to believe you over me, you're mistaken. They need evidence, and you don't have any." "I have everything that matters," I replied. "I have the toxicology report. I have the missing documents, and I have my own word, which I no longer diminish to protect you." Her eyes narrowed to thin slits. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I do," I said softly, "for the first time." She stood there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to find the leverage she once held so effortlessly. But the room stayed quiet. The house, my house, no longer bent itself around her. Finally, she snatched her coat from the armchair. "This isn't over," she said. "I know," I replied, "but the part where I stay silent is—" She left without another word, the door swinging shut behind her with a hollow thud. And though the house was silent again, for the first time, it felt like it was on my side. The next morning began with a phone call that made my hand tighten around the receiver. Detective Hale's tone was calm, but there was something heavier underneath it. The weight of confirmation, not possibility. "Mrs. Eldridge," he said, "the toxicology report is finalized. The levels of zolpidem in your blood were over 5 times the therapeutic dose. Combined with the antihistamine and the opioid traces, it created a dangerous respiratory suppression." I closed my eyes. "Meaning?" "Meaning this wasn't an accidental combination. he replied. Someone prepared the mixture. Prepared, not guessed, not improvised. Prepared. A strange stillness spread through me, not fear, not yet, but something colder, deeper, like the way a body reacts before stepping into freezing water. I held the phone a moment longer, listening to the quiet hum on the other end. "We'll be questioning Clara again today," Hale continued. "Separately from your son." "I see. You should stay home and keep your door locked." "I will." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the steam rising from my tea. I could still feel the faint outline of Clara's last words in the air. "This isn't over." She had said it like a promise, not a threat. But Hale's tone told me it was both. David arrived around mid-morning, his face pale from too little sleep. He sat down heavily across from me. "They took her in for questioning," he said quietly. "She wasn't happy." "I imagine not." He rubbed his temples. "Mom? They showed her the report. She kept insisting she thought it was herbal, but she couldn't explain where the other medications came from." I watched him closely. "And you?" He hesitated. I asked her directly, "Did you give my mother something you shouldn't have?" She wouldn't answer. She just kept crying, saying we were all turning against her. "And what did you feel?" I asked. He leaned back in the chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Like I didn't recognize her, and like somehow I didn't recognize myself either. I reached for his hand. His fingers curled weakly around mine, a gesture that felt like he was trying to hold on to something solid while the rest of his life tilted dangerously. "She said you've been paranoid lately," he murmured. "That you imagine things, that you misremember. But Mom," the more she talked, the less it sounded like she was defending herself. It sounded like she was rewriting you. Rewriting me. Yes. She had been doing that for years. I just hadn't named it. "What happens now?" David asked. "The investigation continues," I said. "And we let it." He nodded numbly. He stayed for a while longer, walking through rooms as if seeing them for the first time, noticing details he had once dismissed. The opened mail, the moved medications, the misplaced papers. When he finally left for the station, I stood by the window, watching his car disappear down the street. And that was when I saw it. A familiar figure across the road, half hidden behind the Hendersons' maple tree. Clara. She wasn't looking at the house directly, but her posture was strained, her arms folded, her face tight with something that wasn't sorrow or fear, but fury. A cold, watchful fury. The moment she realized I'd seen her, she turned abruptly and walked down the sidewalk, her steps fast, almost frantic. A tremor rolled through me, but it wasn't weakness. It was clarity. This woman had not expected resistance. She had not expected questions. She had not expected me to wake up. But I had. I closed the curtains slowly, my hand steady, my breath even. The investigation had begun officially today. But for me, the reckoning had begun the moment I opened my eyes in that hospital bed and finally understood. Someone in my family wanted me quiet, and I had no intention of being quiet anymore. The house was quiet after David left, but it wasn't the comforting quiet of mornings past. It was the kind that made memory louder, the kind that brought back versions of myself I hadn't allowed to surface in years. If I was going to face what came next, I needed to remember who I had been before softness became a habit, before silence became a refuge. I made myself a cup of tea, carefully, watching every step, an old ritual reshaped by caution, and sat by the window that overlooked the street. The same street where my husband Thomas used to wave at neighbors while mowing the lawn. where Lily learned to ride her bike, where I stood one snowy evening almost a decade ago, believing that widowhood meant shrinking into a smaller life. Back then, fear had been new to me. Now it felt like a companion I understood. I thought about the years after Thomas died, how I'd returned to the hospital to work part-time, not because we needed money, though we did after the medical bills, but because I needed to feel useful, needed to be someone other than poor Martha, alone now. I remembered the night shifts, the soft beeping of monitors, the complicated comfort of caring for strangers. I remembered holding the hands of women who were afraid, telling them to breathe, telling them they were strong. Somewhere along the way, I stopped telling those things to myself. I don't know when it happened, when fatigue turned into resignation, when Clara's sharpness became something I tiptoed around. Maybe it began with a small moment. The time she corrected me in front of my own granddaughter, or moved my kitchen utensils because I was old-fashioned. Perhaps it was when she stopped asking my opinion and started assuming it was irrelevant. And I let her. That is the part that stays with me now, the letting. I took a slow sip of tea, tasting more bitterness than chamomile, and whispered into the empty room. I wasn't always like this. As if in answer, the sunlight broke briefly through the clouds, settling warm on my hands. I studied the lines along my knuckles, thin, delicate, reminders of decades spent caring for others. These hands had changed bedpans, stitched wounds, soothed brows, cooked meals, held a child through fevers, buried a husband, paid bills alone for the first time at 62. They had done too much living to be dismissed as fragile. A knock on the door startled me. My pulse quickened until I recognized the voice on the other side. My neighbor, Mrs. Landon, a widow my age with a soft step and sharper instincts than people gave her credit for. When I opened the door, she looked me over in one sweep. "Saw your son's car here earlier," she said. "You all right, dear?" No one had asked me that without motive in a long time. "I'm fine," I said, then corrected myself. "I will be." She reached out, patting my arm with a gentle firmness. "If you need anything at all, I'm next door. And I don't mind minding someone's business when it's for a good cause." I managed a small smile. "Thank you." After she left, I closed the door slowly, touched by the simple kindness, but also reminded of something I had forgotten. I was not built to be powerless. I had walked through far darker moments and found my way back. And as I stood there, listening to the steady rhythm of my own breath, a new thought settled in my chest. Steady, unshakable. Maybe this ordeal wasn't just about what Clara had done. Maybe it was also about what I was finally willing to stop enduring. I walked back to the table, where the folders lay neatly stacked, and placed my hand atop them. Whatever strength I once had wasn't gone. It had simply been waiting. David returned in the late afternoon, looking as though the weight of 2 households had settled on his shoulders. His eyes were red, but not from crying, from exhaustion, from thinking too hard, from the kind of strain a man feels when he realizes he has been standing on a fault line without knowing it. He sat down across from me at the dining table, where the folders still lay like silent witnesses. He didn't reach for them this time. He just rested his elbows on his knees and held his head in his hands. "They questioned her again," he said finally. "She kept changing details. First, she said she never saw your pills. Then she said she reorganized them for you. Then she said she mixed the drink but only used a harmless sleep aid. The detective told me the dosages were precise. Too precise." He lifted his face, and there was something broken in his expression. Not shattered, but cracked open in a way that could no longer be ignored. "Mom, I don't know who to believe," he whispered. "I don't know how I missed all of this." I took a slow breath. Sometimes love makes us blind, David. Sometimes fear does. He shook his head. Fear of what? Fear of admitting that someone you share a life with is capable of harm. Fear of seeing patterns you've been avoiding. I touched his hand gently. Fear of losing the family you thought you had. He looked at me then. Really looked. And I saw the truth settle into him with a heaviness that was almost visible. "I kept defending her," he said quietly. "Every time you said she'd snapped at you, I said she was stressed. Every time you looked hurt, I told you that you misunderstood. I didn't want to see what she was doing." He swallowed. "To you, to me. You were trying to keep your family together," I told him softly. "That's not a sin." "But it wasn't together," he said. "It was balanced on a lie." He leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. The detective asked me if there were any signs of controlling behavior. I didn't know what to say. But then I remembered how she hid our financial documents from me last year. How she told me you were too forgetful to handle your own mail. How she insisted on managing Lily's school calls because she thought I was too disorganized. He paused. I didn't see it as control. Not until now. "Some forms of harm don't look like harm," I said. "Not until you're standing far enough away." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Mom, there's something else." He hesitated. "They're checking the signature on your old power of attorney documents to make sure it hasn't been altered." I felt the world still. "Altered how?" "There's a possibility someone added a clause recently. The investigator said the ink ages don't match." His voice shook. "Mom, did you ever sign anything new with Clara?" "Anything at all?" "No," I said firmly. "Nothing." He ran a hand across his face. "Then she had no right to touch those papers." He looked physically ill at the thought. God, how did I not see it? I reached across the table, touching his wrist. "Because you trusted her. Trust is not a flaw." He exhaled shakily. "She's furious with me. Says I betrayed her. Says I should stand by her." "And will you?" I asked. The silence that followed was long, heavy. When he finally spoke, it was with a voice stripped to its truth. "I can't stand by someone who endangered you, Mom. I can't stand by someone who lies every time the truth would cost her." A small, fragile relief bloomed somewhere deep inside me. Not joy, not triumph. Nothing so loud. Just a quiet exhale after years of holding my breath. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "Honesty," I answered gently. "That's what happens next." He nodded slowly, as if the word itself gave him something to hold on to. For the first time, I saw not just my son sitting across from me, but a man choosing the truth even when it tore through everything he loved. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something we both had needed for a very long time. The next 2 days unfolded with a tension that clung to the air like humidity before a storm. I moved through the house quietly, aware of each sound, each shift of floorboard, each passing car outside. It wasn't fear. Fear has a wildness to it, a sharp edge. This was something steadier, heavier. A readiness, perhaps. A bracing. Detective Hale called early in the morning. "Clara has obtained an attorney," he said. "She's refusing further questioning without legal counsel." Of course she was. Clara had always been quick to claim victimhood the moment she felt control slipping, but something in his tone told me that this wasn't the shield she hoped it would be. "We're examining her purchase records," he continued, "as well as her text messages, And there's a discrepancy in her timeline. Discrepancy. Another small fissure widening. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, hands wrapped around the mug for warmth. The steam rose in faint curls, and I felt a strange detachment, like watching someone else's life through a window. Only it was mine. Every corner of this house held pieces of me, yet now those pieces felt sharper, edged with betrayal. David arrived mid-morning. He didn't knock. He walked in slowly, as though uncertain which version of his life he'd find today. "She's angry," he said without greeting. "She's blaming me. She says the investigation is only happening because I didn't defend her strongly enough." "Did you defend her?" I asked gently. He shook his head. "No, I couldn't. And she knows it." He took a seat across from me, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, she told me she thinks you're doing this to punish her. She said you've always resented her, that this whole thing is some twisted revenge." I felt a flicker of disbelief, then a kind of sad amusement. "Revenge," I repeated softly. "After all these years of silence?" He nodded. "She doesn't see it. She doesn't see any of it." That perhaps was the truth that hurt him most. "She's called my phone non-stop," he added. "Left messages, crying, angry, pleading." He exhaled. "But none of it sounds like innocence. It sounds like desperation." We sat in silence for a moment. Then David said, "The detective thinks she changed something in the trust documents. He's pretty sure the signature was altered. I told them to check everything." A coldness spread through my chest. Not fear, but recognition. I had always felt an unease around those papers, a slight tug in my memory whenever Clara insisted on organizing them. "Mom," David said, voice barely above a whisper, "the lawyer called me. He said any signature tampering could lead to criminal charges, real ones." I looked at my son carefully. He wasn't asking permission. He wasn't asking me to protect her. He was telling me what he already understood. The woman he married had crossed a line that could not be undone. "What will you do?" I asked. He swallowed. "I told her she needs to stay somewhere else tonight. She refused at first, said this is her home, but I insisted." "And Lily?" "She's staying with a friend until things settle." His voice grew tight. "She's scared, Mom. She doesn't say it, but I see it." I reached across the table and touched his hand. He held mine tightly, like a man reaching for solid ground in a shifting world. "You're doing the right thing," I whispered. He nodded, eyes glistening, not with sorrow, but with something that looked painfully close to resolve. "There's more," he said. "The investigator found internet searches on Clara's tablet, about sedatives, about ratios, about interactions." The words hung in the air, dense and heavy. "David," I said softly, "I'm so sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. I'd rather face the truth now than continue living in the dark." He stood slowly, as though his body carried twice its weight. "I'll be at the station if you need me," he said. "They may ask for updated statements." When he left, the door clicked shut behind him with a softness that felt like grief. I finished my tea, the last sip gone lukewarm, and set the cup down carefully. Clara had begun to realize this wasn't a misunderstanding she could cry her way out of, and I had begun to realize that survival sometimes looks like telling the truth after a lifetime of whispering it only to yourself. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear, but because for the first time in years, my mind was fully awake, clear, steady. I sat at the dining table long after midnight, the lamp casting a soft circle of light over the folders I had gathered. It felt almost ceremonial, like laying out the pieces of a life before deciding how to protect it. By morning, I had made my decision. I called a lawyer, not the one David and I had used after my surgery. A new one, recommended by Mrs. Landon's nephew. A woman named Evelyn Carlyle, known in town for her quiet competence and her unwillingness to be intimidated. When she arrived that afternoon, she carried a simple leather briefcase and the calm authority of someone who had rebuilt many lives from worse ruins than mine. "Mrs. Eldritch," she said warmly, "I've read the preliminary notes from the detective. You're doing the right thing meeting with me now." I offered her tea, but she shook her head politely. "Let's begin with your documents." We sat at the table and I pushed the file box toward her. It felt strangely like offering a part of myself. She began sorting through the papers with a precision that impressed me. Every missing receipt, every irregular gap, every bank statement with an unexplained withdrawal, she noted them all without judgment. Then she reached the folder containing the old power of attorney form. "Martha," she said, her voice measured, "did you sign this version?" "I signed a version," I admitted. "Not this one. The signatures match your handwriting," she said, "but the pressure, the ink flow, the stroke order, they suggest tracing." She paused. "This clause here, the one granting access to financial accounts, was not part of the original form." A coldness settled along my spine, though I had expected this. "So she took it," I said quietly, "and altered it." Evelyn nodded once. "Yes, and that is a criminal offense. But more importantly, it means we need to secure everything now, legally, formally, without delay." She opened her briefcase and removed several documents. "This," she explained, sliding the first paper toward me, "revokes all previous powers of attorney, effective immediately. The next paper, this creates a new medical directive, one that no one can manipulate. Another, a revocable living trust. We transfer ownership of the house and your accounts into it. You retain full control. No one can access anything without your explicit consent." I traced the edges of the papers lightly with my fingertips. "And Lily?" I asked. "I'd like her to receive what I leave behind." Evelyn smiled gently. "We'll name her as beneficiary, clearly, formally, and irrevocably." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt something inside me loosen. Not weakness, but release. A letting go of all the quiet compromises I had made for years. All the silent endurance. Evelyn placed a pen beside me. "Whenever you're ready." I signed each page carefully, my hand steady, my breath even. With every signature, I could almost feel a faint lifting in my chest, an undoing of a long, invisible weight. When the final document was signed, Evelyn gathered the papers neatly. "You've taken back control of your life," she said gently. "That isn't easy at your age, but it's powerful." I nodded. "I should have done it sooner." She held my gaze. "You did it now. That's what matters." After she left, I remained at the table, staring at the empty space where the folders had sat. The house felt different. Not safer yet, but reclaimed, as though my name had been rewritten into its foundation after fading for too long. And for the first time in many years, I felt the quiet, unshakable certainty that my life belonged to me again. The house felt different after Evelyn left. Not lighter, not exactly, but aligned, as if the walls themselves had shifted slightly, recognizing me again. My name was on every document now, my control restored not by kindness or trust, but by law. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching familiar surfaces. The mantel, the back of the sofa, the worn banister Thomas once polished each spring. For the first time in a long while, these things felt like mine without apology. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a quiet rhythm. I opened windows to let in the cool air. I tidied the kitchen, not because anyone expected it, but because I wanted to restore the small order that had been displaced. I cooked a simple supper, roasted vegetables and a bit of chicken, for no one but myself. It had been years since I'd cooked only for my own hunger. The scent filled the house softly, carrying memories of evenings long before Clara joined our family, before the quiet strains settled into the corners. When I sat down to eat, I didn't rush. Each bite felt strangely grounding. I thought of all the meals where I had tried to make myself a small presence, accommodating tastes that weren't mine, adjusting recipes to avoid criticism that always came anyway. Tonight, no one commented. No one judged. No one rearranged the table as if my choices were flawed. After dinner, I stepped outside to the porch. The sky was turning the color of faded lilac, streetlights flickering one by one. Across the road, I saw Mrs. Landon watering her flowers, and she lifted her hand in greeting. I returned the gesture. It felt good. Simple, human, warm. A moment untouched by conflict. Inside again, I began sorting through a drawer of small things, old letters, photos, little reminders of a life that had once felt fuller. There was one picture of David as a boy, standing on a beach, holding a crooked seashell he'd found. His smile was wide, unburdened. I traced the outline of his face and wondered how long he'd carried the weight of keeping peace between two women who never understood each other. My phone buzzed. A text from David. I moved out for the night, staying at a friend's. Lily's safe with her classmate's family. I'll explain everything tomorrow. Try to rest, Mom. I read the message twice, not because I doubted it, but because it marked a shift I had never expected to see. David choosing distance, choosing truth, choosing clarity over comfort. It was painful for him, I knew that, but also necessary. Some truths carve their own paths, whether we're ready or not. I replied simply, I'm proud of you. Then I set the phone aside and returned to the drawer. At the back lay a small wooden box Thomas had made me the first year we married. Inside were little things I'd collected over decades: a pressed camellia, Lily's first drawing of our house, a tiny pin shaped like a stethoscope, a gift from a patient my final year at the hospital. I held the pin in my palm, remembering that version of myself, steady, capable, unafraid to speak. I realized she had never left. She had only quieted herself, as women so often do when the world around them grows demanding or dismissive. But now, in the stillness of my reclaimed home, I felt her return. Not loudly, not triumphantly, but with a soft certainty that wrapped around me like a shawl. I brewed a cup of tea and carried it to the living room. I didn't add honey. I didn't decide against it because someone else preferred it plain. I simply chose for myself. When I settled into my old armchair, the cushions accepted me the way they always had, shaping themselves to my familiar weight. Outside, a breeze brushed the window. Inside, everything was calm. And for the first time in many years, the quiet didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. Morning came softly, without urgency. I woke to the faint hum of the heater and the muted rustle of the maple outside my window. For once, my first thought wasn't fear. It wasn't even worry. It was a quiet awareness that something inside me had finally settled into place after years of shifting uneasily, like a chair that never sat flat on the floor. I made my breakfast slowly. Oatmeal, a slice of pear, a small cup of tea I prepared without second-guessing myself. I didn't listen for footsteps that weren't mine. I didn't wait for a voice to comment on how much sugar I used or whether I should eat something lighter. The silence stayed gentle. By noon, David had arrived. He looked tired, yes, but different, as if the storm inside him had moved through, leaving clarity in its wake. He stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure whether he should step into my space or ask permission. That small hesitation nearly broke my heart. "Come in," I told him. "This is still your mother's house." He exhaled, relieved, and stepped inside. For a while, we sat at the table, neither rushing the conversation. He told me that he had spoken to a family counselor, that he wanted Lily to meet with someone neutral to help her process everything. I admired him for that, for choosing care instead of denial. Then he said, "Clara may face charges, Mom. It depends on what else they find." I nodded. The truth no longer bruised, it simply existed. "What will you do?" I asked quietly. He looked down at his hands. "I'm staying away from her for now. I need to understand how much of my life was shaped by fear of her reactions. I didn't realize how much space she took from you. And from me." I reached over and touched his wrist. "You were trying to keep peace. There's no shame in wanting peace." He shook his head. "But there is in enforcing it at your expense." We sat with that truth between us, not sharp, not accusing, just present, like a bruise beginning to fade. Later, Lily joined us, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. She hugged me tightly, as if afraid I might disappear if she let go too soon. I held her longer than usual. When she pulled back, I noticed she'd been crying. "Grandma," she whispered, "thank you for telling the truth. Children often see more than they're allowed to say." I brushed her cheek gently. "Thank you for seeing me." We spent the rest of the afternoon in quiet company. Lily did her homework on the sofa. David fixed a cabinet door that had been loose for months. I baked a small apple crumble, the way I used to before life grew crowded with other people's needs. Outside, the light dimmed slowly. Inside, peace settled again. Not fragile, not temporary, but earned. In the evening, after they left, I walked through the house once more. It felt different again, but now in a way I understood. The house was adjusting to its rightful shape, bending itself around one voice instead of two. Mine. I stopped at the mantel and touched a photograph of Thomas. Him holding Lily as a baby, both laughing, neither aware of the years ahead. I whispered, "I found my way back." And for the first time, I believed it fully. As I prepared for bed, the quiet followed me through the hallway like a trusted companion. No tension, no unease, no listening for the shift of someone else's intentions. I lay down beneath my quilt and let the darkness settle softly around me. My body felt tired, but not from fear. From standing tall again after too many years bent inward. It was a good tired, an honest one. And just before sleep took me, I thought, old age doesn't steal our strength. Silence does. And I am done being silent. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt small in your own home or quieted in your own life, stay with me. Share your thoughts, your voice, your truths. Sometimes a single comment can remind another woman that she's not alone in the dark.